Welcome to our exciting new episode of Talking About Stoicism. We were going over the Moral Letters by Lucius Annaeus Seneca. We landed in letter 78, and he talks about illness, and I found this interesting. It made me think of some stuff. So, letter 78, from Seneca to Lucilius, greetings. So you are troubled with frequent sinus infections, and with the bouts of fever that go with them when they are chronic and long-lasting. I am sorry to hear it, all the more as I have experienced this sort of illness. At first I thought little of it. Being young, I was able to put up with hardships and stubborn in dealing with ill health. Eventually I succumbed, and became so emaciated that my entire being seemed to be dripping out through my sinuses. More than once I entertained an impulse to end my life, but my father was elderly, and that held me back, for I thought that I could die bravely, and also thought that he who was so kind to me could not bravely bear the loss. So I commanded myself to live, for there are times when just continuing to live is a courageous action. I will tell you what consoled me then, but first I will say this. The thoughts that comforted me had medicinal powers. Honorable consolations are curative. What raises up the mind also benefits the body. It was my studies that saved me. It was philosophy that I had to thank when I rose from my bed and when I regained my strength. I owe it my life, and life is the least of what I owe to it. Friends contributed greatly to my recovery. They encouraged me, sat up nights, talked to me, and so brought me comfort. O most excellent Lucilius, nothing strengthens an invalid as much as caring friends. Nothing does as much to take away his thoughts of death, his fear. I felt that as long as they remained alive, I was not really dying. I kept thinking that I would live on, not among them, but through them. It seemed to me I was not yielding up my spirit so much as passing it on. So he deals here with the idea, with the concept of being sick and what that means. And I have talked about this in the past when we're doing these videos. The idea of being sick and tolerating suffering. And at some point, I mentioned Dionysius the Renegade, who was a Stoic, until he got a very bad eye condition that was very painful, and he pretty much let go of Stoicism a bit, and let go of the idea of virtue as the most important thing in life. Actually being pain-free is not that bad either. So I think it's very important, because it's very easy to say, oh, just bear something magnanimously and just keep going, and it's going to be okay. But it may not be okay. Some people are sick and they will never get better. And even if you do get better, if you have ever been in a sick bed, so to speak, then you know that the world becomes a very interesting place. In my early teen years, I underwent some leg surgery, which was not because anything had happened to me. It was just, in a nutshell, it was correcting the position of my legs one by one. You can't do it at the same time. And there is I'll spare you the details of the surgery, but it's although it is just mechanical, it's pretty invasive, and the recovery time for a single leg is about a year. So it takes you about a year to really learn how to walk again, be mobile again. And for the first 6 months or so, you can't put any pressure on the leg. And I want to say I was about 14 when I had my first surgery, probably 13, 14, something along those lines. And initially, you undergo the surgery, you're in the hospital, you're in your early teens, so in many ways you're still very much a child, reliant on parents for all sorts of things. So you're in a hospital, and that's lonely, and then you come home, and that's also kind of lonely, because parents have their own lives too, which is as it should be. And although I was taken care of excellently, I'm not saying anything along those lines, or suggesting anything along those lines, but the experience of being bedridden for a longer period of time is quite remarkable. And although I had nothing life-threatening, again, it was just a mechanical thing that had to be corrected. I remember distinctly lying in bed. it can't have been more than a week, maybe 2 after the surgery, because at some point I went back to school, but I was still at home recovering initially. And let me take a sip. And I remember feeling quite overwhelmed. It was just a moment. It was a moment of feeling overwhelmed because I was bedbound. I had to be moved around in a wheelchair. I could sort of hobble along on crutches, but not easily, because again, I couldn't put any pressure on that leg. Especially at first, that's terrifying, because you think that if you accidentally do, even the most minimal amount of pressure is going to do damage to what they did in the surgery. So there was that fear. But more importantly than that, there was the inability to walk on my own, without crutches, without being in a wheelchair. And I knew it was only temporary, but still, a year-long recovery is not nothing. And I remember thinking to myself, and that to me was now in hindsight, it's a fairly stoic thought. 14-year-old S.B.R.E. Brown told himself, it's bad now, but think about where you will be a year from now. And if that's too far away in time, think about where you will be 6 months from now. You can put pressure on your leg again. You can start to walk again. And it'll be okay. So I try to project myself into the future. At some point, it will be okay. Now, as I said, not all illness, this wasn't really an illness, but, not all medical stuff is like that. Sometimes you don't get better. But certainly not trying to make light of that, because I can't picture what it's like to get that sort of message of you will not get better, right? But just speaking from my perspective, how I have experienced this, that thought was tremendously helpful. It's bad now, but it will get better. Now, to put things in perspective, at the same time I had my leg surgery, in my high school was another girl who actually had her leg amputated. And that was really the same period of time. And I also thought to myself, relatively speaking, I'm really lucky. All I have is a mechanical issue that a surgeon can fix. But for her, that was a matter of she really lost her leg below the knee, if I remember correctly. And what's interesting is that she actually went on to, in sort of like a field and track thing with an artificial leg specifically designed for her, and became like a national champion of, I'm blanking on this term in English, but when you run and you jump and see how far you can jump. That's probably a technical term for that. But she won in that category, which I thought was incredibly impressive, right? That you have such a setback so young in life. I think she was a year younger than I was, and you move forward doing that and accomplishing that. I think that's very impressive. In any case, I hope you'll forgive me this kind of trip down memory lane, but the point I was trying to make was twofold. One, do not forget to situate yourself in the position of others too. Because I know it's a bit of a cliche to say, some people have it way worse than you, but that's often true. Some people do have it worse than you. That does not mean that your suffering does not matter. It does matter. But it can help you put things in perspective. And the second point is, when you suffer, that suffering will end. It can end in a variety of ways. And I'm sure you understand what I mean when I say that. But sooner or later, it will end. and not losing track of that time frame is important. It certainly helped me in that fairly difficult situation, even though, again, it was just a mechanical thing. I knew I was going to get better, but when I struggled, I kept reminding myself of that. It will get better. You can count down. With every day that passes, you get closer to your recovery. And that helped me. So, again, I hope I'm forgiven this reminiscent talk. But I hope it is useful. Let me know what you think. How you handle this sort of thing, if you've ever been in that type of situation. And that's all let's do it. Thank you so much for watching. I'll see you again soon.